In the early 1400s, China ruled the seas. Its fleet was the largest the world had ever seen. Ships, so huge they made European vessels look small for another 100 years. Everything pointed to one future. China would dominate global trade, expand its reach, shape the world beyond its shores. But then it stopped, not slowly, not by accident. It burned the fleet, destroyed the records, walked away from the ocean. No enemy forced this decision. No crisis made it necessary. The strongest naval power on Earth chose to disappear. So what happened? Why would an empire at its peak turn its back on the world? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. This is not just a story about ships. It's a story about a decision that changed the course of history. At its peak, China was unmatched. Its economy was strong. Its technology was ahead. Its fleets crossed oceans with ease. It stood at a crossroads. One path led outward, toward exploration, trade, and influence across distant lands. The other turned inward, toward control, stability, and isolation. Both paths made sense. One promised expansion. The other promised order. But only one would shape the future of the world. If China had continued outward, it could have dominated global trade long before Europe rose. It had the ships, the knowledge, the power. Instead, it chose restraint. And that choice did something unexpected. It didn't just change China. It created space. Space for new powers to rise. Space for others to take control of the seas. And that's where the story truly begins. To understand this decision, we need to step into the world of Ming China. This was not a weak or isolated empire. It was the center of a vast system, a system built on trade, tribute, and influence. Its cities were massive. Its markets were active. Its government was organized and powerful. In many ways, it was ahead of its time. Chinese technology outpaced Europe. Its ships were larger. Its industries more advanced. Its economy more complex. While Europe was still divided and unstable, China was unified and confident. And then came Zheng He, a naval commander unlike any the world had seen. He led fleets of enormous ships across the Indian Ocean. Not one voyage, but many. These were not small expeditions. They were floating cities. Hundreds of ships. Tens of thousands of sailors. They reached Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, even the east coast of Africa. But these voyages were not about conquest. China was not building colonies. It was building relationships. Rulers offered tribute. China returned gifts. Power was shown, but rarely forced. This was influence without occupation, control without invasion, a different kind of empire, one based on presence, not possession. And for a moment it worked. China stood at the center of a connected world, respected, powerful, and unmatched at sea. But maintaining such a system came at a cost. And soon, that cost would become impossible to ignore. But beneath this golden age, pressure was building. The treasure fleets looked powerful, but they were expensive, very expensive. Each voyage required thousands of men, massive ships, endless supplies. And unlike trade, these missions did not always bring profit. They brought prestige, influence, symbolic power. But symbols don't feed an empire. Inside the Ming court, doubts began to grow. Not everyone believed in this outward vision. Confucian officials, who shaped the empire's thinking, saw the world differently. To them, stability came from within. Strong farms, controlled borders, order at home. The ocean offered none of that. It was unpredictable, risky, hard to control. And worse, it shifted power. The voyages elevated eunuchs, like Zheng He, not traditional scholars. This created political tension inside the court. So a question began to echo through the empire. Was exploration a strength, or a dangerous distraction? Was China expanding its power, or weakening its foundation? At first, these questions were quiet, but over time they grew louder, and soon they would demand an answer. Slowly, a new idea began to take shape inside the imperial court. Power was not something to expand. It was something to protect. For many officials, China was already complete. It had land, resources, people, and order. It did not need the outside world to grow stronger. In fact, the outside world looked unstable, unpredictable, even dangerous. Foreign trade could bring influence, but also chaos, new ideas, new conflicts, new risks. So the logic started to shift. Instead of projecting power across oceans, China could secure at home, strengthen its borders, reinforce its internal systems, maintain control where it mattered most. This was not fear. It was strategy, a belief that true dominance comes from stability, not expansion. And once that idea took hold, everything else followed. Because if the outside world is a risk, then the solution becomes clear. You don't manage the risk. You remove it. Slowly, a new idea began to take shape inside the imperial court. Power was not something to expand. It was something to protect. For many officials, China was already complete. It had land, resources, people, and order. It did not need the outside world to grow stronger. In fact, the outside world looked unstable, unpredictable, even dangerous. Foreign trade could bring influence, but also chaos, new ideas, new conflicts, new risks. So the logic started to shift. Instead of projecting power across oceans, China could secure at home, strengthen its borders, reinforce its internal systems, maintain control where it mattered most. This was not fear. It was strategy, a belief that true dominance comes from stability, not expansion. And once that idea took hold, everything else followed. Because if the outside world is a risk, then the solution becomes clear. You don't manage the risk. You remove it. As China turned inward, something unexpected happened. The oceans didn't disappear. The trade routes didn't collapse. They were left open. And in that empty space, a vacuum began to form. At first, no one filled it, but not for long. From the other side of the world, smaller powers stepped forward. Nations that were not as rich, not as stable, not as advanced, but they had something different. Urgency. Portugal moved first, then Spain, followed by the Netherlands and United Kingdom. They did not see the ocean as a risk. They saw it as an opportunity. Where China saw instability, Europe saw potential. And so they built a different kind of system, not one of tribute, but of expansion. They explored aggressively, traded relentlessly, and when needed, they conquered, step by step, route by route, port by port. They connected the world, not through balance, but through control. And over time, the system grew, from scattered voyages to global empires. What China had stepped away from, Europe began to dominate. And once that shift began, it would not stop. This pattern isn't just history. It repeats across nations, across companies, even across individuals. The same choice appears again and again. Do you expand into uncertainty or retreat into control? One path feels dangerous. New markets, new ideas, unknown risks. The other feels safe. Protect what you have. Control what you can. But both paths carry a cost. Expansion can break you. Too fast, too far, too exposed. But control has its own danger. It slows you down. It limits growth. It quietly locks you in place. And the most dangerous part? The consequences don't show up immediately. At first, everything feels stable, safe, predictable. But over time, the world moves. New players rise. New systems form. New opportunities get claimed. And slowly, without warning, your position starts to fade. Because in any system, when one side steps back, someone else steps forward. China did not collapse when it turned inward. In fact, it remained powerful for centuries. Its cities still thrived. Its system still worked. Its authority remained intact. On the surface, nothing seemed wrong. But something had changed. The system had stopped moving. Power without expansion becomes static. And static systems, no matter how strong, face a hidden weakness. They don't adapt. Meanwhile, beyond its borders, other systems were evolving. Faster, more aggressive, more flexible. They made mistakes, but they learned. They took risks and grew stronger. And over time, that difference began to matter. Because history doesn't reward stillness. It rewards movement. This is the real story, not just about ships, but about mindset. A shift from exploration to preservation, from openness to control, and how the fear of risk can quietly shape the future, long before decline becomes visible. By the time the change is clear, the balance of power has already shifted. When China burned its treasure fleet, it didn't just end a chapter. It changed the direction of history. The oceans remained. The opportunities remained. But the player at the center stepped away. And that changed everything. The age of Asian dominance slowly faded. In its place, European powers began to rise, not because they were stronger at the start, but because they chose differently. They moved outward. They embraced risk. They built systems that expanded. And over time, that choice reshaped the world. This wasn't decided by one battle or one collapse. It was decided by a decision, a quiet shift in strategy, a different way of seeing power, control, or possibility. And history shows what happens when one is chosen over the other. History isn't just something we study. It's something we repeat. The same patterns, the same decisions, the same hidden consequences. If the story made you see the world differently, there's more beneath the surface of every turning point. Moments that look small, but quietly change everything. So if you want to understand how power really shifts, not just through wars, but through decisions, subscribe and keep exploring. Because sometimes what didn't happen matters more than what did.